it's never a good position to be in a sound-alike position. You want to be the first. Just like KHJ, even though it was the third radio station to play top 40 music, because you had KRLA and you had KFWD still on the air, but they didn't sound like the other stations. There was forward progression, there was gravity, there was an excitement to it.
That is the voice of legendary Southern California radio program director Jhani Kaye. Last time we were talking about Gordon McClendon and why everybody wanted to work for him. And we're going to be talking more about McClendon. We also have an announcer that we all knew and loved for many, many years on a legendary game show who programmed Coast about a decade before Johnny did. And we'll find out who that was very shortly.
Gordon had KLIF in Dallas. They literally had 90 shares. The mayor of Dallas would brag that when he got out of the office each day, he turned on KLIF 1190 in his car. Everyone listened to that radio station. And Gordon had made his fortune through various means, one of which was the McClendon Theater chain. He owned a bunch of drive-in movie theaters across the country. And he had parlayed all of this into this radio network that included, which is very funny, it included Coast Los Angeles, where I ended up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Coast was a beautiful music station, and Cox Radio had purchased it, I believe from McClendon before that. And even one of my dearest friends in radio was Roddy. Now, Roddy was one of the announcers on The Price is Right. He's the one who wore the sparkly jackets. He was rather a robust individual. Come on down. You know, he did it just like Johnny Olson did. And Rod and I became best friends. Both of us only eat lunch and dinner, so that's 14 meals a week. We were so close that out of the 14 meals a week, we probably had 10 together.
Wow.
So Rod, at one time, Gordon had sent him out to program Coast as a beautiful music station. He had Coast in Los Angeles and Cable, KABL, in San Francisco, both beautiful music. Rod was so amazed when I got the job because I was into the six figures. And back when Rod was programming Coast in 1973, Gordon was only paying him $15,000. And it was so little, he couldn't afford rent. Rod had to fly up to San Francisco each weekend to do weekends on KSFO in order to pay the rent in Los Angeles.
That's crazy. Were the ratings so bad for Coast that they weren't able to pay him that much, or was it just McClendon was not a very generous person, or maybe a little bit of both?
Well, Gordon was probably frugal, but everyone wanted to work for him because he was such a genius. Here's part of his genius. When I was in high school in Hemet, he changed Coast to KADS, K-A-D-S. Gordon was always thinking, you know, he was on the bleeding edge of creativity. The format was people like yourself could call up and go, yeah, my name is Jhani Kaye, and I have a lawnmower for sale. I'd like $58 for it, and I can be reached at this phone number. Okay? And you would be your telephone bill would be billed for that ad on KADS. So he had a station that was ad-based and only played music in, like the Tijuana Brass, in between ads of real people. He was so far ahead of its time.
Wow. Yeah, I remember back in 1980, Saturday Night Live kind of made fun of a format like that. It was called All-Time Radio. Harry Shearer, who had joined the cast after John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd left the show, and it was the DJ on the thing. All-Time Radio, KTIM All-Time Radio. Hi, how's it going? Oh, it's going pretty good. What time is it? It's 4:15. Thank you very much. Let's take some other calls. It's 4:15. It's 4:15. It's 4:15. And the caller's like, oh, yeah, you've been saying it's 4:15 the last 4 minutes. Our clocks here is broken. Let's call some of our lucky winners of those K-Time watches. Yeah, you want to watch recently? What time is it? Oh, the watch broke after the first week. He's like, okay, next week we're going to an all-weather channel here on K-Time.
Yeah, they were so creative. That reminds me of at KHSJ, my first radio station in Hemet, we had a segment called Telephone and Tell It. And all I did as the announcer was take phone calls. You know, KHSJ, who's this on the phone? And this is Mary Harper. Yeah, what do you have, Mary? I have an old Singer sewing machine. It's 18 years old, but it still works, and it's black and doesn't come with a desk, but it works wonderfully. And if anyone would like to give me the money for it, what's your number? Meanwhile, we had to take the notes, and then after the call, I'd have to say, okay, that was Mary Richards from so and so, and she has a 1948 Singer sewing machine, and it was so funny. It was remarkable to listen to. The Coast format change, a lot of format changes are driven by demographics. The problem with a beautiful music station in 1982 for Cox Radio was it was 50 plus. You had no young people in the audience. So you had no younger demographics in your audience. And of course, the advertisers, especially the agencies, were thirsty for 25 to 49-year-olds.
I remember the station that I think had the most listeners of the beautiful music was KBIG FM 104.
Actually, the station that amazed everyone, there were three beautiful music stations. There was KJOY, KJOI, K-Big at 104, and Coast at 103.5. Coast and K-Big pretty much sound the same. And Coast was always the number 3 beautiful music station in L.A. It never rose to the top. So that was part of the reason to get out of the format. Plus, adult contemporary was beginning to take off. In fact, the term wasn't even pretty much, registering in programmers' minds at that point in time. So those people who got into the format first typically won. And that's a lesson I learned at Cox, because K-Big jumped in behind us. They never beat us in all my time there. And I learned the lesson, the value of being first in a format. It is so important. If you're first in the format, you're paying attention to details, and you're making very few mistakes, you're going to own the throne.
Yeah, I remember K-Big always trying to coast itself, and it just never worked.
It's never a good position to be in a sound-alike position. You want to be the first. Just like KHJ, even though it was the third radio station to play top 40 music, because you had KRLA and you had KFWD still on the air, but they didn't sound like the other stations. There was forward progression. There was gravity. There was an excitement to it.
Yeah, and before Coast came around, there were some adult contemporary stations. What was the missing piece of the puzzle that Coast was able to put in? Because there were some others, but Coast was the one that perfected it.
Actually, what happened was they were MOR radio stations with an adult contemporary feel, but they were too wide. They played Perry Como as well as Hall & Oates. We defined it and refined it and did what Bill Drake was. Instead of the top 49 records, we played the top 30. And we made sure that all those records were compatible with one another and that the needle didn't swing one way or the other on the scale too far.
Now, when you selected the music, how much was determined by record sales as well as KOST's opinion, both your own as well as that of the music director? Well,
music director was kind of a weird title for the person who met with the record representatives. The music director, in most cases, at the successful radio stations, sorted through all the new product that the record companies were exposing him or her to, and then they walked in and sat with the program director and probably together decided which songs they would add to the radio station. But the program director typically, if he had an ear at all, made the final decision about new music getting on the radio station. In terms of Coast, first of all, it had to fit the format. I listened to a lot of product that came in through the door that was meant for KISS and clearly not Coast. So it was nice to be exposed to it, but I couldn't consider it for Coast. So does it fit first? Does it have the hit potential? Is this the third, fourth, fifth single from an album? Because the more you go down, the less success the singles typically have from any one album. How much promotion is going to be behind it? Who else is playing the record? How many radio stations are playing it? And where do they have it ranked? That's really important. That was the way decisions were made prior to music research, where you actually called out or got people in a hotel room and had them listen to the music.
How much of a pioneer were you in the call out or the auditorium testing of the songs?
I wouldn't call myself a pioneer. I just say that I was on the leading edge. Cox Radio was the one who gave all of the Cox program directors the tools of music research. And they had a wonderful example that they shared with all of us. The example was focus groups. So you're a boot manufacturer, and you keep making boots, and you want to be number one in the boot industry, but it's not happening for you. And so you get some construction guys who wear boots, and they're talking about boots and everything. And as they got up to leave, one of the guys said, "You know what would be fantastic? Why don't you guys tell the boot manufacturers they should put steel toes on the boots, on the toes? We drop things all day long, and we have broken toes. That would be so great." And bingo, that's research. In other words, all you have to do is ask your target listener, viewer, user what they want. And if you get a good group together, they will tell you what you need to do. They will give you the gem of an idea or tell you exactly what you need to do to become a loyal customer of yours.
And loyal customer it was. I mean, you had many great DJs over the years. In fact, your original morning man, David K. Jones, was your colleague at WCFL 1000 AM Oldies in Chicago.
David was actually my morning man in El Paso before Chicago. I got to take David with me when I went into Chicago as the assistant program director. David, that's a great story about kindness and networking and doing the right thing. So here I am. I'm a program director in El Paso, Texas. When you're in a market that's that low on the ladder, you almost have to beg to get people to go to work for you. So you would put an ad in the trade papers and say, "Hey, morning man wanted, yada, yada, yada." And this one guy called from Oklahoma City, and he sounded great. And we talked on the phone, and he said, "Look, I'm not going to El Paso, Texas." At one time I was out of work, and I sent out tons of letters and resumes, and no one responded but you. And I could tell you wrote it on a personal typewriter because the keys were not in alignment, and it looked like a high school essay. And I said, "Yeah, that's me," because I had my little portable Smith Corona, and I responded to every letter, something I did my whole career. You got a personal response from me. In any event, he says, "I'm going to do you a favor because you were kind to me. That lifted my spirits that you did that. There's this guy, David K. Jones, also in Oklahoma, yada, yada, yada. You should contact him." And I did, and David agreed to come to Texas, and the rest was history. So your kindness goes a long way. And that's something else I always shared with Air Talent. Don't ever mistreat a producer or someone who is helping clean around the building or whatever. One day, if they love broadcasting enough, they're going to be in a position to give you a job. It's amazing how people pass one another going up and coming down. So you don't want to make enemies, and you want to be kind to everyone.
Tell us about Chicago. WCFL was one time a big top 40 station, Super CFL as it was known as. Then it went to Beautiful Music. The funny thing was that its first 6 months of Beautiful Music, Larry Lujak was still mornings because he still had a contract, and they said he was totally out of place being a funny guy on a Beautiful Music station, but that was the contract. But by the time you got there, it was an oldies format, oldies adult contemporary. Tell us about the WCFL you were on.
Actually, WCFL went to a lifestyle format. You might have a half hour about tennis lessons and then another half hour about basketball. You never knew what was coming up on that radio station. David Martin, who had been on WFYR, Fire in Chicago, was hired as the program director of WCFL to take it back to music.
We're talking with legendary program director and radio disc jockey Jhani Kaye, and next time he'll talk about his journey to Chicago and WCFL, as well as the origins of love songs on the coast.